Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this Autodesk Manufacturing webinar. My name's Clinton Perry, and it is my pleasure to be your host today as we take a look at the latest release of Autodesk's Fusion 360 with PowerMill CAM software, this being version 2023. Now, before we get going with the specific details about this release, I just wanted to quickly show our safe harbor statement. Now, because we're so focused on this release, it's unlikely that I'm going to be talking about ongoing development activities and future releases. But if I do make mention of that, please bear this in mind that these development plans can change. And so your purchasing decisions today and in the future should really take this into account. Now, with that said, our agenda for today is as follows. Now, over the next 25 minutes or so, I hope to give you a very high-level overview of this particular release of PowerMill. We'll be covering what's new, what's been enhanced, what's changed. We'll also dig into how you can learn more about this particular release and when you'll be able to get hold of it yourself. And then if you're new to PowerMill, and this is all completely new to you, then we'll give you a little bit of a teaser in terms of where you can go to learn more about the broader capabilities of Fusion 360 with PowerMill and how you can maybe even evaluate the software for yourself. Now, let's start with a very high-level overview of this particular release. So PowerMill 2023.0 will be released to our eligible customers with an active subscription or a maintenance plan starting on the 11th of May of 2022. So that's very soon. Depending on when you're watching this webinar, you may already have received this particular release, in which case, fantastic, that's great to see. Now, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about how you can get hold of this release a little bit later on, but high-level view, you will be able to download this latest update in one of two ways, either using the Autodesk desktop app, which is accessible down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or by visiting your online Autodesk account at manage.autodesk.com. And continuing the theme of the last few releases of PowerMill, PowerMill 2023 includes a mixture of enhancements, fixes, and new functionality fundamentally focused on improving your quality of life of using this product. So we'll be talking about speed, quality, and reliability throughout this presentation. So let's continue by reviewing some of the major improvements in this particular release. And I've just picked out 5 of my personal favorites. There are many more, but these are the 5 sort of highlight features, if you like. The first is that we have included a number of significant speed ups and performance improvements to commonly used commands within PowerMill. This is an ongoing thing that we've been working on for a good number of releases. If you've been watching these webinars in the past, you'll recall that we've done this many times before. In addition, we've added new options to help you have greater control over the machining of shallow open regions using the steep and shallow finishing strategy. Again, we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail later on. One of my personal favorites is that we've improved the ability to apply leads and links to toolpaths with a number of options to automatically trim toolpaths to allow that to happen. Again, we'll dig into that in a bit more later on. The next is that we've improved the machining setups functionality that's been in PowerMill for a good few releases. We've improved the consistency of our automatic collision avoidance by making tool axis tilting more consistent. And then a host of other changes, including something that's not hugely important to your daily use of PowerMill, but it is very noticeable, and that is that we are adopting Autodesk branding throughout the PowerMill products. You'll notice this with the startup icon and in-product interface elements like the help screen and so on. Okay, so that's a high-level overview. Let's now take a deeper dive into some of these features. And we'll start with the speed and performance gains that we've included in PowerMill 2023. Now, we've enhanced a number of areas of PowerMill's underlying algorithms, the kernel, if you like, that is baked into the PowerMill product. And if you're using Fusion 360 and its machining extension, you'll also benefit from many of these speedups because the kernel is shared between PowerMill and the Fusion 360 product. So It's a double whammy. If you're using both those products, you'll see these benefits in both of them also. So starting off, we've improved the speed of our automatic collision avoidance algorithm. So this applies to any toolpath where you activate the auto collision avoidance option. We have noticed varying levels of speed up here. In our tests, we've seen sort of 5 to 10%, but our beta customers, our tester customers, if you like, they've reported speed gains of around about 15% in some cases. So it's a small but significant improvement in terms of performance. And think about the impact that could have on you, particularly if you're machining large, complex components. The next area that's been improved is our curve projection finishing strategy. And this has been sped up by around about 40% in many cases. Again, the exact gains will vary depending on your computer and the sorts of models that you're programming. Our spun profile calculation functionality has also been sped up in PowerMill 2023, and we're seeing speed gains of up to 60% in this case. And this is principally because we've improved the use of multi-threading functionality for this particular strategy. Now, the next area where we've improved the speed inside PowerMill is in the time taken to open and save PowerMill projects that contain toolpaths that have been collision checked. So this is a bit niche, but it's going to affect many of you. And in fact, many of our customers, many of you, have raised this as a concern when you've reported problems back to Autodesk. And so what we've done is taken that feedback on board, we've analysed our algorithms, and we've noticed that yes, there was a slowdown, and so we have fixed that, and now you'll see a significant improvement in the time taken to save these projects, especially in very large projects where you're talking gigabytes of data, which many of you will be frequently using. So as a summary, all of these speed gains clearly are going to give you a big impact, and that is it's going to shorten the time that it takes for you to create your high quality toolpaths, either giving you more time to experiment with other strategies or fundamentally allowing you to start machining sooner. Now you'll notice at the bottom of this slide, and in fact many slides, there's a little YouTube icon. This reminds me you'll actually be able to see some tutorials that dig into these specific enhancements on YouTube. So as of the 11th of May, please go onto YouTube, search for PowerMill 2023, and you'll be able to see this and other videos. Now, one of my technical marketing colleagues has very kindly carried out some tests to show the speed gains that we're releasing in this particular version of PowerMill. Now, these tests have been carried out using a fairly powerful workstation laptop. You see the specification on the screen now. It's certainly not the latest generation of Intel chipset. You may have a faster computer, but this is fairly representative of many computers that you'll be using. And our first test considers the speed ups that we've included in curve projection finishing. And what we're seeing here is the time taken to calculate a curve projection toolpath on a reasonable size bottle mold. And we're comparing the differences between PowerMill 2022.1.1 and this latest release, PowerMill 2023. And you can see the difference is quite noticeable. We've reduced from nearly 23 seconds down to 15 seconds. That's a saving of just under 8 seconds or 33%. So that's a huge gain. Even on something as quick as a 23-second toolpath, that's a big saving. Scale that up to a very large complex part. If you're seeing a 20 to 30% saving, that's potentially saving you 1 day a week in terms of CAM programming time. So these are huge savings. Our next example of speed ups considers the spun profile calculation that I mentioned earlier on. And you can see the component that we're considering here. This is a large revolved component, but it's not perfectly cylindrical. You can see there are bosses and lugs and different features that are poking out at different angles. The spun profile calculation allows us to calculate a swept profile that fully encapsulates that part when it's rotating. Look at the difference in calculation times here between PowerMill 2022 and PowerMill 2023. I know this is a quick toolpath, but we've reduced from nearly 21 seconds down to 8 seconds. That's nearly a 13-second time saving, or 60+%. Again, scale those time savings up to larger, more complex parts, and you can see the potential savings this is going to offer you when you're using PowerMill to program your parts. And then finally, the third example I wanted to share with you was an example where we are seeing a speed up in the automatic collision avoidance algorithm. Now, in this case, we're using steep and shallow machining to machine this entire part. It's a die. You can see the size of it in those coloured boxes there. And we've reduced the calculation time here from 1400 seconds down to 1360 seconds. That's actually a relatively small saving of 42 seconds, but it is still a speed up. And I think this demonstrates very clearly our attitude to PowerMill currently, and that is that we are determined to keep working to make the algorithm faster, more reliable, more robust. So even a 3 to 5% saving is going to be welcomed by many of you. And as I mentioned earlier on, our beta testers, and that includes Autodesk employees, our sales partners, and many of our customers, have actually reported larger savings, often as high as 15%. So you can see some significant speed gains there, and I'm hoping that, like me, you're very happy to see that. Now, the next feature we're going to talk about is some improvements that we've made to our steep and shallow finishing, and specifically the machining of shallow regions. Now, if you've used this strategy, you will know that we have two options when it comes to the shallow region area machining. You can either machine these regions with a raster strategy or a 3D offset strategy. With 3D offset, we now have added a new option to optimize open pockets. Now, the videos that you see on the left-hand side of the screen really show this quite nicely. The image in the top shows the shallow area machining of an open pocket using PowerMill 2022. And you can notice that the strategy itself is a series of closed offsets, where the offset is based on the outside edge of the surface being machined. But notice that there is an open edge. So we should be making use of that open edge, and that is the new option that we've included in PowerMill 2023. Look at the video in the bottom of the screen, and you'll notice that now we're machining another open region. But this time, if you look very closely, you'll see how the offsets are open. Now, you must be asking yourself, so what? What difference does this make to you and the sorts of machining that you're going to carry out yourself? Well, because these are open offsets, there's a number of benefits. First of all, there are fewer changes of direction in the toolpath, so that should see an improvement in the quality of the surface finish because there's less likelihood of a dwell mark appearing on the part. But also, because we're machining the part from the open edge, there may well be some noticeable improvement in the tool life. There's less tool wear because there's less heavy cutting happening. So the net effect here is better quality parts and ideally reducing the costs associated with consumables like tooling. Now, the next feature we'll talk about is one of my personal favourites for this particular release, and that is that we've improved leads and links to allow them to be more safe, more reliable on more occasions. Now, there are two key updates that I'd like to mention here. The first is the ability to automatically trim a toolpath to create extra space to allow safe leads to be applied. Look at the image on the right-hand side of the screen here, and you can see a raster toolpath that is machining a purple selection of surfaces. Look very carefully in the area highlighted in yellow, and you can see that PowerMill has correctly applied vertical arc lead in and out moves. This is what we want on the whole toolpath. But now look carefully at the red and black highlighted areas, and notice how we have not applied those arc moves in these areas. Now, why is that? Well, in this case, it's because PowerMill it calculated the toolpath to machine those purple surfaces, but it allowed the tool to come very, very close to the white surfaces that surround it. And then there was no extra space available to apply the vertical arc move. Because we have gouge checking switched on, PowerMill only has one option, and that is to withdraw the tool vertically. Now, if you're machining soft materials, vertical plunge moves may be okay, but obviously if you're machining harder materials, that's likely to be a problem, and you may end up breaking tools or even compromising the workpiece. And so that's the area where we focused for PowerMill 2023. Now, prior to this release, if you wanted to absolutely apply vertical arc moves to this toolpath, you would have to use something like a polygon sketch to limit the toolpath back and allow PowerMill to apply the lead out moves. But that's time consuming, and you don't know that you're going to get it right. There's a lot of guesswork involved here. Now, if we scan forwards to the result of this, the PowerMill 23 update, you'll see that we now have a new tick box option in the leads and links settings within the toolpath form. If we tick the trim segments option and recalculate that toolpath, now look carefully at the toolpath and you can see that all of the areas now have a vertical arc lead in and lead out move applied. Some toolpath segments are so small that in order to apply that lead in and lead out move, the toolpath segment isn't long enough, and so that entire segment is removed. In fact, that's a really important point. PowerMill is trimming the toolpath back to allow the lead in moves to be applied, but therefore there will be potentially some additional stock left on the machine that you'll need to remove using an additional toolpath. In this case, a corner finishing toolpath would work wonderfully. Now, the second area where we've improved leads and links relates to the machining of components where you are dealing with undercuts or overhanging geometry. Take, for example, this manifold component that you can see on screen. We want to use the lollipop cutter that you can see on screen to machine a fillet on the inside of this component. In fact, you can see the toolpath that would be calculated on screen now. Now, we have asked PowerMill to apply horizontal arc moves to this toolpath, but they haven't been applied, and as a result, PowerMill reverts to the default lead in, lead out move, which in this case, which is a vertical move. And you can see the consequences of that are that the tool collides with the workpiece during one of the approach or retract moves. This is clearly not acceptable. Now, with PowerMill 2023, we've changed this. And so by activating the trim segments option that we mentioned before, PowerMill will now trim the toolpath segments back to make sure they're safe, and then apply appropriate lead in and lead out moves automatically this toolpath to ensure that it is safe. One other minor point here is if PowerMill removes a toolpath segment through this process, as I mentioned earlier on, you will notice some additional warnings being displayed just to make absolutely sure that you understand that there may well be a need for you to do some additional toolpath creation in localized regions. So obviously the benefits here are clear. We've reduced the amount of time that you would have to spend manually editing toolpaths, making it easier for you to create high quality NC code, and also ultimately giving you greater confidence that when you machine your parts, the likelihood of collisions and gouges occurring has been reduced. Now, the next feature we're going to talk about is PowerMill's machining setups and a couple of changes that we've made here. Now, machining setups are not new, something that's been in PowerMill for a good number of years, but what we have done is improve them in two key areas. The first is by changing the workflow when it comes to work planes, and to make that workflow more intuitive. Now, with this release of PowerMill, when a setup is activated, its work plane is automatically activated as well, something that didn't used to happen in previous releases. Equally, when you create a toolpath in a setup, the setup's work plane is no longer automatically activated with the toolpath. That's what used to happen. Instead, by default, the toolpath will now use the current active work plane, whatever work plane that is. Now, it may well be the setup work plane, but it isn't forced to be the setup work plane. And then finally, if you create an NC program directly from the setup, there's a right mouse button click to allow you to do that, then the setup's work plane is automatically fed into PowerMill as an NC an NC program output work plane. These small changes help reduce the risk of error, human error, where you make the mistake and you put the wrong field or the wrong information into a text box, and the consequences of that can obviously be quite serious. Now, in addition to more intuitive work plane behavior, we've also added the ability to define default settings for machine and model location for each setup. That's really useful, particularly when you start simulating your toolpaths within the PowerMill product. And whilst we've always been able to set thickness groups within PowerMill, we have improved setups in this release so that you can have separate thickness groups for each setup, such that when you create a toolpath in a setup, it inherits that setup's thickness settings. Hopefully that makes sense. So what's the impact here for you? Well, again, it's going to help simplify your CAM programming, hopefully save you time, allow you to have greater confidence that you're going to export safe, high quality NC code, reducing the risk of human error, and we're all capable of it. By making these workflows more powerful, more intuitive, the risk of error is reduced. Now, the next feature I want to talk about is an enhancement that we've put into our automatic collision avoidance, and specifically that we've improved the consistency of our tool axis tilting. Now, in order for me to help explain this, I'm going to use a simple example on the right-hand side of my screen. And here we're using constant Z machining to machine the vertical sidewall of this feature. In PowerMill 2022, even though I've asked it to create a 3-axis constant Z toolpath, because I'm using collision avoidance, PowerMill rightly recognizes that there is a collision that could occur between the tool holder assembly and the workpiece. And so here, the tool axis tilts to the side to avoid that collision. Fantastic. The problem here is that PowerMill 2022 has applied a varying amount of tool axis tilting as we work down the side of this component, such that by the time we get to the bottom of the part, the tool axis tilting has changed quite significantly. Now, why is this a problem? Now, the key issue here is that by changing the contact point on the cutting tool profile, we expose ourselves to varying errors in the cutting tool setup. Things like tool run out, varying levels of cutter push off, and even the dimensional inaccuracies of the profile of the tool itself. All of that can contribute to a degradation in surface finish. And so some of our customers, some of you even, have complained that we need to find a way to stabilize the tool axis tilting to avoid these bands of surface finish appearing on the part. And so with PowerMill 2023, you'll now notice that by default, automatic collision avoidance will try to use a more consistent level of tool axis tilting on neighboring toolpath segments, such that you'll get a more consistent level of cut condition across the entirety of that region being machined. How does this affect you? Well, you should see more predictable machine motion. You should see more consistent tool axis motion, which ultimately reveals a more consistent level of surface finish on your part. And then the last feature that I'm going to talk about in great detail is a couple of type commands that we've added to help you automate the machining of inclined planar surfaces using 3+2 machining, so specifically not simultaneous 5-axis machining. Now you can see a great example of this on the left-hand side of my screen here, and that is where we're machining a large mold tool with a number of inclined planar surfaces. These are all flat surfaces, but they're not all coplanar to the XY plane of the machine tool. They're all at different angles. And you can imagine the challenges of machining those with the end of the bottom of a flat end mill. It's quite a lot of effort there in order to create work planes and create boundaries to machine those surfaces. Well, with PowerMill 2023, we've started to reveal some commands that are part of a larger project to help automate the machining of these sorts of surfaces. These commands allow you to either select all planar surfaces within a user-defined angular range, or to create one or more work planes that are aligned normal to those planar surfaces within those user-defined angular ranges. The idea here is that you can use these commands now in some sort of macro or automation utility to help you create toolpaths really quickly to machine these faces with 3+2 machining only. And watch this space, we are actively working on more automation to make this even simpler. Now, in addition to all of these features that I've talked about at great length, there are many others. We don't have the time to cover them all today, but I will just quickly run through these. The first is that we have improved the accuracy of our new rest finishing strategy. Now, this is still in preview, but what you should notice is that this strategy now finds more corners, it finds more stock, it removes it in a more predictable and consistent way. Toolpath quality is improved. We're getting closer to the point where this preview command will be able to be revealed to the masses so that you'll all be able to use it without that preview functionality. We've also made some improvements to our additive toolpaths, such that two toolpaths that share the same layer bands, so toolpaths have the same slices at the same Z level, these toolpaths can be combined together, and PowerMill was clever enough to maintain the ordering of those toolpaths. If you ever write whole features out of PowerMill to an XML file, you'll be happy to hear that that XML file now supports the use of depth, type, and level properties. We've also improved our Flex licensing. Now, this might not affect many of you, but if you are using Flex as a means of accessing the PowerMill product, you'll be happy to hear that we've improved our Flex licensing algorithm to avoid instances where we can charge you for periods of inactivity. It's a rare thing that happens, but it could happen, and so we've now found that, fixed that, that is improved. Our spiral offset slice area clearance toolpath now provides the ability for you to machine open flat areas using the outside in option. We've provided new parameter functions that can allow you to either partially or fully reset the toolpath safety status of a toolpath. We've improved the quality of our corner finishing toolpaths, primarily to allow a better quality toolpath to be produced, more corners to be identified, less likelihood of fragmentation in toolpath, and so on. I mentioned spun profile earlier on. In addition to them being sped up, we've also improved the accuracy of the profile that gets generated. We're producing better point spacing, more logical and more accurate arc fitting, so that the profile that gets generated is just a higher quality. And something that I've mentioned earlier on, and you can see on the bottom right corner of the screen here, like many, in fact all of the Autodesk products that are being released this year, we are adopting the Autodesk company-wide branding. So you'll see a new PowerMill logo. So, gone are the days of the old PowerMill P. I'll still be wearing this occasionally, but maybe not in these presentations. I'll be wearing, the Autodesk A t-shirt from this point on. But the key thing here is that you are going to see this new PowerMill branding running throughout the product, in the install, in the startup splash screen, various other areas as well. Okay, so wow, that took a fair old amount of time. Just to summarize this particular release, as I say, there are multiple speed and performance improvements. Don't forget that new option to optimize the machining of open pockets with steep and shallow machining. My personal favorite, that wonderful tool to automatically trim toolpaths to apply safe lead and link moves. Improvements that we've made to machining setups with more intuitive work planes, the ability to find model location and machine tool, and that all-important improvement to our automatic collision avoidance with more consistent tool axis tilting. It's a great release of PowerMill. We continue to focus on the areas that are going to make a huge difference to you in your day-to-day life with the PowerMill product. Now, in saying all of that, where can you go if you'd like to learn more about this particular release? Well, there's a number of things. First of all, I would suggest go onto YouTube starting from the 11th of May. We will publish a series of tutorials that walk through many of the highlights that we've talked about today, giving you detailed step-by-step instructions to explain how you can start to use these improvements. If you don't know how to find these videos on YouTube, just literally search PowerMill 2023 and you should see a long list of videos, not just covering this release, but there's actually an entire playlist that goes right the way back through to PowerMill 2017 and beyond. Equally, once you've downloaded the PowerMill product and you've installed it, you can click the F1 key in PowerMill and you'll be able to access the online help site. Here you'll be able to see those same tutorials. You'll be able to access data sets, so you can actually recreate the tutorials themselves. You'll see the release notes, known issues, getting started videos, and even some essential skills videos if you're completely new to PowerMill and you want to learn more about getting up and running. And in case I haven't mentioned it already, the online help site is available in languages besides just English. Now, when can you get hold of this latest version of PowerMill? Well, as I mentioned at the start of the call, PowerMill 2023.0 will start to release to you, our lovely customers, starting the 11th of May of this year. Depending on when you're watching this video, you may already have downloaded this product. Now, how can you get hold of it? Well, it's one of two ways. Either by using the Autodesk desktop app. You can access that by clicking on the task tray at the bottom right corner of the screen, clicking on the Autodesk desktop app icon. This launches the desktop app. Simply select the product that you want to download, click install, wait a few moments, install the software, and you are good to go. Alternatively, if you don't want to use the desktop app, then you can log on to your Autodesk account at manage.autodesk.com, select all products and services. Here you'll see a list of products that you're eligible to download. Simply pick the one that you want, click download, install it, and again, PowerMill is on your computer and ready to go. Now, what if you're new to PowerMill? You've never used PowerMill before, but you're interested in learning more. Well, I would recommend that you visit the PowerMill Product Center or website. This has recently been updated to include a whole host of updated, refreshed, and new video content to talk about PowerMill, its capabilities, how PowerMill can be used alongside the Fusion 360 product, because obviously Fusion comes with PowerMill, and also a list of customer stories so you can see how other customers are making a difference to their business with the PowerMill product. I'd also recommend, if you want to learn more about PowerMill, you can go to our request evaluation page, fill in your details, and one of our super skilled technical sales teams will contact you to start a conversation to learn about your business, your CNC machining needs, and see whether PowerMill is a good fit for you, or maybe one of the other Autodesk manufacturing products too. And with that, we are at an end of our presentation. I thank you so much for your continued loyalty to PowerMill. I thank you for taking the time today. We overran a little bit. Hopefully you found that worthwhile. I wish you the very best in the year ahead, and I very much look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. And with that, thank you very much and goodbye.